When we think of the meaning of education, we often think of an acquirement of knowledge. We see ourselves as these jars meant to receive and hold on to information. Sometimes this information is simple facts to memorize, and other times it is understanding difficult concepts. Ideally, this information is acquired over a steady period of time, and sometimes it's crammed the night before an exam you may or may not have done too well on. To contrast, let's look at the etymology of the word education. Education comes from the Latin root educare, which roughly translates to lead forward or to bring forth. With this, we can see that we are not just jars meant to hold on to information. Rather, we are vessels by which information enters, is processed, and is then given back, bringing forth a better version of ourselves. I want us to really focus on that last part. Education is meant to bring forth a better version of ourselves. Now, do we really live by this meaning? Look, I'm a college student, and I can tell you that this is not always the way I approach my own education. And my time in a university setting has shown me that not many students do. For this reason, I want to call on us all to redefine what it means to receive an education and how we can use this new framework to better ourselves and our world. Most discussions around education are geared towards educators and what they can do to better develop their methods. However, the purpose of this discussion is to empower the student in all of us to look at our education a little differently. To help with this, I asked a group of high school students to tell me what they thought education was in about one word, and you'll see some of their responses behind me as we go through this talk. So, let's set up our lesson plan. First, we'll look at why education often seems so burdening. Then we'll see how learning is a natural way and a powerful tool to bring ourselves closer to our passions and each other. Then we'll move to look at how education is not just a tool to help people, but can be the motivation to help people. Education is not just a vehicle. It's not just the car we take to change. Education is the reason we get in the car in the first place. And lastly, we'll look at the social responsibility that comes with education. If we are to truly see 2020, then we ought to be seeing as both students and citizens. We must be students in our classrooms, but we also must be students in the broader world. Likewise, we need to be citizens in the broader world, but we also need to be citizens in our classrooms. And in our classrooms, we often see education as very frustrating, this rigid and burdening institution in our lives. Now, is this because of the rigor of the system or something more pervasive, like the way we define ourselves and our capacity for success? We grew up in a culture that loves to use the word smart. When we use this word, we instantly define ourselves as either having an innate capability to succeed or not. I want us to do away with the word smart. When we use words like this, we instantly put a cap on our potential. In fact, there isn't really such thing as inherited intelligence. The concept of inherited intelligence was pushed by researchers Ernstein and Murray in their book, The Bell Curve: Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life, in which they pushed the idea that the socioeconomic structure of American society, as well as its intersections with race, are the way they are because people in poverty are naturally less intelligent. This theory has since then been debunked, as research has shown that environmental factors play a much larger role in intelligence and success than an inherited set of genes. So why do we still define ourselves this way? If a student seems to grasp a concept quicker than other students, this does not necessarily mean they are smarter than their peers, but rather that they likely were exposed to similar thinking or concepts somewhere earlier in their lives. Likewise, in Angela Duckworth's 2013 TED Talk titled Grit, The Power of Passion, she found in her research that IQ had little correlation with student success. Rather, it was their grit and resilience that did. It's not smart, it's effort. These same ideas pushed the research of Dr. Carol Dweck's of MindWorks, coining the terms fixed and growth mindsets. Students with a growth mindset see their education as flexible, dependent on what they put in, whereas students operating from a fixed mindset see their capacity for learning as limited by an innate ability. They also found that students that operate from a growth mindset are more likely to take on challenges, even with the fear of failure. This is important because if we tell ourselves we are smart, if we fix ourselves to these words, then we shy away from opportunities that could bring failure because it would threaten that title. However, if we tell ourselves that our capacity for growth is in our own hands, we don't fear failure. We embrace it. Many of my teachers in high school, especially in our science department, were always trying to encourage us to adopt a growth mindset. They taught us to love struggle because that means that we've reached an opportunity to learn. So when our education feels frustrating, and it will, sometimes we'll feel like we just can't get it no matter how hard we try, don't let this limit you. Rather, struggle. But as my teachers would always say, struggle well. Because when we struggle well, when we build from what we do not yet know, we see growth. And who doesn't love to grow, right? I mean, I know I would love to grow. These are heels. And similar to our love of growth, believe it or not, we actually love learning. Learning is an essential part of human nature. We often think of learning and education as only being possible within the institutions of a classroom. But if we take a step back, we can see just how natural it really is. Early on in our lives, it is learning and exploring the world around us that allows us to understand our own existence, contextualize our environment, discover what we love, and build relationships. In fact, this is evident even in our language. For example, when we are describing a close relationship we have with someone, we say that we know them. This shows that learning is precisely what unites us. And if this is true, what if we take this idea a step further? If learning is what unites us, then this translates easily to the way that we often sit in our classrooms together. If we begin to look at education, recognizing it in these more intimate and everyday forms, we can begin to appreciate it in the classroom as well. Oftentimes we see education in the outside world and the classroom as two completely different things. And while I definitely can't claim that our education system is structured perfectly, it is still possible to enjoy both because they're fundamentally about something that we naturally enjoy doing, learning. And I know a lot of us also struggle with another burning question. Well, what if I like learning, but I just don't really care about what I'm learning? And this is very understandable. But in Cal Newport's book, Be So Good They Can't Ignore You, he finds that passion is not always a prerequisite for enjoying the work we do. In fact, it's often the hard work and determination we put in towards mastering a concept or developing a skill that engenders within us a passion and love of the work we're doing. That means that the same work that can get us past frustration, as we mentioned before, is the same work that can get us past disinterest. This is a powerful thing, especially when we are learning about each other, or how the world works, or why in history this happened, or happens, or will happen. Education allows us to tap into this expansive network of collected growth and experiences of the world around us, further uniting us. The moment our ancestors began to record their history, they created a bridge that spans centuries and continents, because now we can learn from them too, connecting their past and our future. if we approach our lecture halls, even the ones that feel like dungeons, like mausoleums, or like the DMV, if we approach our lecture halls with these ideas, then suddenly sitting there becomes so much more than listening to a professor drone on and on. It becomes you and everyone sitting there with you, expanding your shared network of knowledge. So now that we have examined a new framework of education that frees us from our own limitations and looked at how learning can be natural and uniting, let's elevate this idea to a concept that is especially critical today: social responsibility. Education is a mechanism not only to gain knowledge about a cause we can grow to care about, but also gain the tools to bring about change. And bringing about change takes us back to what we discussed as the original meaning of education: to bring forth. Education is not meant to end with us. In many ways, it starts with us. This idea of social responsibility is also greatly influenced by the fact that most things that I'm talking about today are due to the fact that not everyone in the world has the same opportunities with education. Those of us here who are lucky enough to receive or have received quality education are incredibly privileged on a national and international level. When we look at the sheer inequality of educational opportunities based on race, class, gender, geography, among other factors, this alone can make us instantly appreciate what we have. Again, I cannot ignore that almost everything I have said on this stage today still only applies to a handful of individuals. Let that be motivation to be and do better. And to be and do better, again, we must see as both students and citizens. Because when we have the eyes of a student, we have the heart of a learner. And when we combine this with the eyes of a citizen, we have the mind of someone who is ready to take that knowledge outside of the classroom. And it's interesting to be giving this talk today when this TEDx event was originally scheduled to take place in January of 2020, with the idea of looking into this new decade with 2020 vision. When in reality, a lot of the ideas presented today, not only by me, but by most of the speakers here, are better understood because hindsight is 2020. I think we can all agree that the events we have seen unfold in our world this year demonstrate the importance of public consciousness better than any speech ever could. We saw experts in so many different fields come together in this critical moment. With the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw public health officials and healthcare providers fighting on the front lines of this pandemic. Political leaders, ideally, setting mandates and bringing our communities together. Economists, looking at the impacts this can have on our economy and people's livelihoods for years to come. Artists and designers, making informational graphics that we all spread to get protective knowledge to the masses. With the Black Lives Matter protests, we, long overdue, began to examine racism, particularly anti-Blackness, in virtually every sphere. How does racism affect medical education and care, or hiring practices, or barriers in academia, or the way we see ourselves in arts and media? We began to look at race both sociologically and genetically. We saw how even artificial intelligence can adopt racial biases. Ultimately, we live in such a connected world that every way or discipline of learning is related to someone's way of living. Likewise, when we watch events unfold in our homes, our communities, nations, and world, we must be ready to engage as citizens and learn and listen. But we also must be ready to mobilize as citizens. Education gives us the power to do both. Our time here today has consisted of looking at how education and our culture around it has created a mindset in us that limits our potential. We then looked at a new framework to be able to unleash our potential in these opportunities. Then we looked at how learning exists in so many forms in our lives, many of which we already enjoy, making it easier for us to appreciate them, even in more structured contexts. Lastly, we looked at how education not only enables us and empowers us, but requires us to make change if we are to live by its true meaning. So, education can seem frustrating, but in reality, it is that effort and that struggle that allows us to achieve growth. And this growth is essential in building a better future for us and our world. And to make that change, education gives us that power. For my family, education has meant everything. My uncle was an incredibly hardworking man who used his education to bring the rest of my family to the United States decades ago. Education is the way that my siblings and I are able to honor the sacrifices my parents made as immigrants. It's the reason we have had every opportunity we have been given. Education is, for many reasons, why I am on this stage today. So I hope education, in any of its many forms, enables us all to find fulfillment in every form. Thank you.